Okay, welcome back. Now I live in the suburbs out here in Edmonton, and it's rained a lot over the past couple of days and just turned sunny. So we're pretty much going to have to put up with the lawnmowers in the background for the rest of this video. How much we can do about that. We just shot our first coat of urethane finish onto this woodworking project. And I think it went pretty well. I've come back in here, I should say, this is about 3 hours. I've let this sit for about 3 hours. Now does that mean that this finish is ready to aggressively sand, and is it fully cured? No. I'm kind of cheating a bit here, but because we're going to do 3 coats of urethane, it's pretty tough to get away with anything less than 3 coats of urethane and get a nice finish. But do I want that to take me 4 days? No. So I am going to do a quick little sand here and throw another coat on and let that dry overnight. Now, what kind of results do I have? When I'm running my hand over this wood, what I'm noticing is a lot, especially not so much on this side is smooth, but I've got a lot of raised grain feeling along this other side. Along the heavily grained portions of this wood, it's much rougher than it was before I shot it. Don't worry, that's normal. It's very normal for those fibers to raise up a bit after we've stained them and now hit them with that urethane coating. Don't sand between your coats of stain. That's a no-no. But now that we've got a coat of urethane on here, we can start to do some finish sanding. At this point, we're almost taking our woodworker's cap off and putting on our auto body worker's cap. Because realize we're not working with wood anymore. Now that we've got this urethane on here, what we are really doing is working with plastic. I mean, essentially that's what urethane is. And that's why you won't see a high-end piece of furniture finished in urethane. It's not ideally what you want. I mean, to bring out that real beauty of wood and just blow people away with your finish, you want a nice natural oil finish, like a tung oil or Danish oil, with no plasticky coating on top. Yeah, I get that. But for real-life furniture that people have to actually use and clean up and put things on, those finishes aren't practical. That's why urethane comes in. It's the most durable, non-yellowing, hard finish you can pick. So it is a good way to go if you're building something that you actually have to use. And the professionals will use this for their furniture. So we've got the coat on here, but it's bumpy. I'm feeling raised grain. So I'm going to do some sanding. And this is where the auto body cap comes in. This is 1500 grit sandpaper I have here on my block. You won't even find 1500 grit sandpaper at a lot of your big box stores. Often you'll have to go to an auto body shop to pick this stuff up. You do not want to start sanding this with 220, 320, typical woodworking grit sandpapers. You really run the risk of going, because we've only got a light first coat on here, you run the risk of going through that plasticky urethane coating and starting to mar your stain finish and getting blemishes and swirl patterns, stuff in there that you don't want. So I got 1500 grit. I'm going to lightly sand this, and I'm going to do it dry, because this stuff isn't I mean, it's not going to be fully cured for a week, but I'm even pushing the sanding limit on this a little bit. So I'm not going to wet sand it. So lightly dry sand it. After doing that, we're nice and smooth. I wouldn't say this is glass-like yet, but it's gotten rid of that any little bumps. And that raised grain feeling. But again, very light, non-aggressive. You don't want to cut through that. This is just after our first coat. I'm just going to flip this around. Now this side has a more pronounced grain in it, and I could really feel the raised grain when I ran my hand down on it. And even after this bit of sanding, it's still not perfectly smooth. I'm feeling more than I would like there. But realize, and this is really important to realize, this is just our first coat. We're going to be doing 3. It's not going to be perfect after this first coat. If it was perfect after our first coat, why would we bother doing 3? So we're knocking down obvious bumps, dealing with a little bit of raised grain, but it is not perfect, and you can really feel it there in between the grains. Especially where and you feel it most pronounced where the grain has soaked up the most stain, because it's the stain that lifts those fibers up. It's okay. So using this 1500 grit on my sanding block, and another little tip I would give for you, sanding is crucial to woodworking, to getting good results in anything you do. But it's also one of the most monotonous tasks we do. So anything you can do to make it a little more enjoyable and less tedious is a great idea. And one of the most tedious things about sanding can be changing the grit of your sandpaper from, if you only have one of these blocks or one orbital sander, it gets really annoying to have to keep changing grit depending on what project you're doing. So pick up a couple of these. They're not very expensive. And I just leave my 1500, and this stuff lasts a long time because it's such a such a high grit, I guess I should say. And I just leave it on here. And so when I'm ready to do some 1500 grit sanding, all I have to do is reach for this one block, grab it, and away I go. At this point, good idea to continue with woodworking practices. Sand with the grain. Don't do anything crazy. Yeah, this is feeling good. When we're sanding our urethane finishes, you really want to stay off. Like I've rounded the edges of the fronts of all these things. You've got to be pretty careful about staying off edges when you sand, because that's where you get the least amount of your finish buildup, and you don't want to stand through those. You don't want to sand through those edges. So what I might do for those, I just don't have a piece of sandpaper. Oh, here's one. I'm just wetting the sandpaper down, because I really don't want to damage anything. I'm using a little piece of sandpaper. I'll just give them the lightest of sanding. Again, this is 1500 grit I've got here. I do not want to cut through it. Dry that up. Okay. So that's all I'm going to do. Do a very light dry sanding both of these. And after I've dry sanded them, I'm going to use a wet rag and just wipe them down. Realize that this water-based urethane still hasn't cured, so I mean it's still going to slightly react to that water. It's almost like a superfine sanding agent to help us just smooth things down a bit, but also make sure we take off any contaminated crap too. And I'll let it dry for a few minutes and shoot it with a second coat. So just to recap, very light dry sanding with 1500 grit automotive sandpaper after our first coat of urethane. I'm going to wipe these down with a wet cloth, allow them to dry, and shoot them with another coat. I'm not going to bother videotaping the second coat shooting because it's going to be exactly the same as the first. I'm just going to shoot it on, same thing. Then I'm going to let them dry overnight, and we'll come back and do a little bit more aggressive sanding in preparation for what hopefully will be our final coat. So that's where we're at.